students, welcome back. We have seen in our previous session the characteristics and the significance of decision making. Let me tell you now that decision making is a process. We call it as a process because it consists of several steps. It's not an ordinary activity for any business enterprise. There are a number of stages. There are a number of steps which are to be taken to make it a complete success. Identification of problem, identification of decision criteria, allocation of weight to criteria, developing the alternatives, also analysis of alternatives, and then selection of alternatives. Followed by this will be the implementation part, that is the implementation of the best alternatives. And lastly, the last step in the process of decision making is the evaluation of the decision effectiveness. I will throw some light on these steps briefly, individually, so that you could understand that in fact decision making is a process. It's not just a function of management. The survival, long-term survival of the business to a very large extent depends upon the decision making. Success and failure of business to a very large extent depends upon the decision making process. So let us see how these steps are to be taken up. These steps, if these are not taken up systematically or with cautious mind, there is possibility that the business may not survive in the long run. We have to make sure that the business is not being started for 1 or 2 days. It is an infinite activity passing from generation to generation. So let us now see these steps briefly, what actually we are going to mean by identifying the problem. By identifying the problem, we find here that it is the first step. A problem is defined. A problem is defined as a discrepancy between an existing and a desired state of affairs. When we talk about the identification of problem, we find that some cautions are to be taken up. Some cautions about the problem identification are to be taken up, which include a number of serious issues. These serious issues, which need to be taken with utmost care and concern, consists of that one has to make sure it is a problem and not just a symptom of the problem. Problem identification is subjective, my dear students. And discrepancies can be found by comparing current results with some standards. Standards are fixed in business world and the comparisons are made. By making comparisons only, we come to the conclusion that we are making progress, we are achieving our goal, we are fulfilling the targets of organization or not. Managers are basically required to just see into details that the company is taking right decisions. And also, let me tell you finally that the managers are not like to characterize a discrepancy as a problem. If they pursue, they don't do, they do not have the authority, information or other resources needed to act on it. They have to find out. They have to bring it to the knowledge of one and all, so that the issues can be resolved. The problems are to be minimized, are to be reduced, controlled, are not to be left alone for the purpose of finding solutions from some outside world. You can see this problem is there in this picture. I have tried to show that problem is one word. Associated with this are many things like how, where, what, whom, when. All these things are there which are to be taken into consideration to arrive at a right decision. A right decision can be taken only when we identify the problem from the point of view of all these issues, all these aspects which are mentioned here, so that we could take a right decision accordingly. Second important thing that comes into picture is the identifying decision criteria. We all understand, we should understand here one thing. The decision criteria are factors that are important, that are very much relevant to resolving the problem. We have to see many important things here, because we are going to identify the decision, that what is the criteria on the basis of which the decision is to be taken up. It needs investment, needs chances of failure, and the growth of the firm. These are the 3 points about which we have to just peep into. Like, we have to see the cost that will be incurred. It is about the investment which is required in business. Also, while identifying the decision criteria, one has to see the risks likely to be encountered. We all understand the risk is a vital part of every business, and chances of failure go hand in hand with the success. Problems are to be detected and taken care of in the beginning, so that the outcomes are such that we are desiring. Outcomes that are desired needs that the growth of the firm. So this is all depending upon the identification of the decision criteria, so that there is not any kind of failure, there is not any kind of mismanagement in the system. Now, the third step, the next stage in this process that comes into picture is the evaluation of the pros and cons. By looking into the pros and cons, we are now going to allocate the weightage to the criteria. When we are taking a decision, the decision is being taken on the basis of some criteria, some logic. So decision criteria are not equal importance every time. Decision criteria are not of equal importance every time. We have to see that assigning a weight to each item places the items in the correct priority order of their importance in the decision making. What we have to do here, we have to see each possible solution. I will tell you that each possible solution must have features of pros and cons. A manager should score the criteria according to the need of the situation. That's what I'm telling you every time, that the need is to be seen. What is the requirement? A decision cannot be made in the air, because we are not dreaming about the situation. We are going to implement. At this stage, we are now going to the completion point. So when we are evaluating, which means that we are now going to conclude the efforts that we have made. Apart from allocating weightage to the criteria, next step lies in solution. Every problem has a solution. We have to find more than one solutions, more than one options. Let me tell you one thing here, that in business world, in order to ensure that we are successful, we should not always rely to plan A. As mentioned earlier in some discussion, that English language has, in its alphabets, has 26 letters. Why to rely only on A when others are available? The plans must be ready. Solution B, solution C should be ready. So as a manager, it is advised that they should select a viable alternative. Why they should go for a viable alternative? Because it could also resolve the problem. And at this point, we are just listening, not evaluating the alternatives. We are developing the alternatives. Why? Because we have to take action. This is the primary stage. This is the situation in which, like you can say that before taking off, aeroplane runs on the runway. That stage we are talking about right now, so that the flight could fly. Then analyzing the alternatives where we think of whether it is yes or no or maybe. Three words are there. We have to make appraisal each alternative. We have to make appraisal of each alternative. We have to see the strengths and weaknesses of each alternative. And also one thing that needs to be focused here, that an alternative's appraisal is based on its ability to resolve the issues identified in step number 2 and step number 3. Now you are at the analyzing stage where you are just making some preparation to go to the next stage. The next stage that comes here is the selecting or selection of the alternatives. After analyzing the alternatives, the next stage comes is the selecting alternatives. Yani, selecting indicates choice. Choice means that we have to choose the best alternatives or the one that scored the highest total in step number 5. This is the most significant stage on which the survival of the business depends. Then the next stage is the implementing the decision. Once the selection process is over, once the alternatives are finalized, that we are going to choose this alternative or the other one which has scored the highest total in this previous step, like this analyzing, while analyzing the alternatives, we find that the one score has got highest, then that score should be taken up. So now here is the implementation part. Implementation, I tell you, my students, is very important step. Here we talk about putting the decision into action. How a decision is put into action is not a big deal. It is just done simply by conveying or converting it into those affected and getting their commitment to it. Yeah, you can say in other words that the putting decisions into action by conveying it to those affected and getting their commitment to it is called implementation of the decision. And finally, most important aspect, where there are only two options, yes or no. It is about the evaluation of the decision's effectiveness. By evaluation of the decision's effectiveness, we simply mean that it is about the evaluating the outcomes. It is about the results of the decision to see if the problem was resolved. And again, if the problem still persists, if the problem is not resolved, then the manager should reassess the problem and start over again. It simply means that if the decision which we are going to take is not appropriate, we can say no. If it is okay, we can say yes. Because in simple words, this stage is the most significant stage on which the future of business depends to a very large extent. The future depends on this issue, that the decision which has been taken is correct. If it is not correct, then manager should reassess problem and start over again. This was the discussion about the various steps taken in the decision making process. So friends, the decision making process is the most important part of the functions of management, wherein we see that it's not an easy process, easy way to convert the problems into solution. It's a very, very careful consideration that needs to be taken up by all those who are involved in the process. Now, apart from this, what is required? What is required consists of a few important points that I will take into consideration here before I go further. Now, after having a look at the various steps of the decision-making process, you might have come to this conclusion that what is the criteria for implementing the decision? Yani, you can say in other words, it is more likely that people who have participated in decision-making process, they would help in its implementation too. They cannot be left alone. They cannot be ignored. Because we are going to find out the criteria for the implementation of the decision. And also, there is a criteria for evaluating the decisions. Implementation and evaluation are two different things, but both are important. Results must be evaluated against objectives. Objectives are generally set at the beginning of the process. Results come later. So they should devise some mechanism by means of which the proper evaluation of the decisions could be taken place. And here what is required to make sure that the decision-making process is perfectly designed, has been done systematically. Three things are there. We will discuss sometimes later these things in details, but right now let me tell you briefly that creativity, innovation and brainstorming, these are the three terms that needs your focus, that need your attention. You understand here one thing from the beginning, try to understand one thing in the beginning, that creativity is the ability and power to develop new ideas. Creativity is the ability and power to develop new ideas. And also, innovation. No business these days will emerge, will prosper, will survive if creativity and innovation factors are not existing in the proper quantity. The quantum, necessity or requirement of the creativity and innovation should be checked with utmost care and concern. Businesses fail because of the lack of these two things generally. Because the organizations which are averse to changes, who are believing in a stereotyped environment, they may not survive. It also requires a focus on group thinking. The purpose of this approach is to improve problem solving by finding new and unusual solutions. This kind of situation is called brainstorming. I will have a detailed discussion about the brainstorming sometimes later. Now, after having a look at the process of decision making, now a few points have come to my mind that I want to share with you. That is regarding managers. Managers can ask these questions when they evaluate the objectives. There is a criteria and there are the questions to be asked. Basically, relevance, for example, if we take. Relevance, if we take, it simply means that do the objectives relate to and support the basic purpose of organization? I'm telling you the questions which managers can ask, can think about. Second thing is the practicality. Here the managers have to ask one question. Do the objectives recognize obvious constraints? Challenge. Here the managers can ask one question that come to my mind is that do the objectives provide a challenge for managers at all levels in the organization? And also measurability. Managers can ask question about the measurability also. How? Simple. In one line they can ask. Can managers quantify the objectives or no? Then schedulability is another step, another question, another criteria on which a question may be inquired, can be asked. Can managers monitor the objectives at the interim point to ensure the progress? or not? And balance. By balance, we simply mean that do the objectives provide a proper balance on all the activities? Do they provide a proper balance on all the activities given organizational goals or not? This is again a question which can be taken up regarding the balance criteria. And then flexibility. It is another question, another criteria about which a manager can inquire about. It is just about, are the objectives suitably or sufficiently flexible, or is the organization likely to find itself locked into a particular course of action? This is again a question to be asked. Timeliness is another criteria on which the managers can inquire whether given the organization's environment, is this the proper time to adopt these objectives? When it comes to technology criteria, here they can inquire, do the objectives fall within the boundaries of current technological development? When we look at the growth, we find here a question from the managers. They can ask, do the objectives help the organization grow, not just survive? There's two different things, growing and surviving. They inquire, do the objectives help the organizations to grow or just survive? And also, two more criteria are there about which the managers can inquire from the management, that is the cost effectiveness. Here, the question comes, that is, do the objectives' expected cost clearly outweigh their benefit or not? And lastly, accountability. Here, we have to make sure one thing, that is, can managers assess the performance of those responsible for assessing the objectives or not? This is another question. So, you see here a number of questions when or while evaluating the objectives can be asked by the managers. Why? Because they want to make sure that the process of decision making remains a complete process in itself. There should not be any kind of vagueness in the process of decision making. After discussing the basic aspects related to the decision making, that how the managers play a role, we are now going to see another important aspect, another important part. This part of discussion deals with the decision making styles. Friends, you were till now going through the various aspects of decision making. I'm going to touch upon almost all the important issues connected with decision making so that you could take into consideration everything about the decision making. It's not only 2-3 topics we cover here, but I want to give you a broader idea. So decision making is an activity, as we have already discussed invariably in our previous discussions, previous sessions. Here, if we look at this picture, we find 4 types of styles of decision making, consisting of analytical, directive decision making, conceptual decision making, and behavioral decision making. We will take these all styles one by one. Basically, analytical decision making, which is a systematic process that entails a comprehensive examination of all available data before reaching to a conclusion. First basic thing. It is about the analytical decision making. This method emphasizes a thorough and systematic analysis of data, aiming to make well-informed and rational decisions. These rational decisions are taken by carefully evaluating various factors and perspectives. You can also say that in this style, a single decision maker is involved, but the responsibility leverage multiple sources of information to arrive at the optimum level. They are responsible for the optimal solution of the problem. Followed by analytical decision making, we have the directive decision making. The name is indicating its meaning on its own. Directive decision making. Friends, the directive decision making unfolds when the decision maker relies on their experience and existing knowledge of the situation to reach a conclusion. It is about knowledge of the situation to reach, not only to reach a conclusion, but also to refrain from seeking additional data, and also about the external information or expert advice, whatever you say. This is another type of style that you can say exists in the decision makers. All individuals are different. Based upon their personalities, they act or react. They plan according to their basic nature. Next, here comes the conceptual decision making. Friends, the conceptual decision making is sometimes referred to as an abstract decision making. It is called as an abstract decision making. In this style, decision makers consider not only the immediate factors, then what do they consider? They also consider the broader context. They also consider the potential future variables and the opinions and the ideas of its stakeholders, means those who are involved in the business. This method involves thinking in its abstract terms, and this method involves taking a more holistic view. This method involves aiming to understand the overarching implications and long-term consequences of the decision. That is why it's a process that primarily focuses on the big picture. That's why we call it as the conceptual decision-making style of decision maker. Followed by conceptual decision-making style, next and the last one is the behavioral decision-making style of decision maker. This kind of style has its own uniqueness. This approach generally leans on the collective insights and also past experiences of the team, past experiences of the team members. It promotes inclusivity and shared responsibility. Again, in other words, you can say that the behavioral decision-making style places a strong emphasis on interpersonal relationships and the emotions of the individuals performing or participating in the decision-making process. Decision makers following this style highly value collaborations and activity soliciting input from the others. They're not confining to themselves only. Their priority is to foster team cohesion. Their priority is to establish a positive work environment. Their priority is to take into account the enduring impact of their decisions on the relationship within the group. That is why we call it as the behavioral decision-making process. So, students, you have seen that decision-making style consists of 4 things: analytical decision-making, directive decision-making, conceptual decision-making, and finally the behavioral decision-making. After discussing the behavioral decision-making, our next focus would be on a very important aspect of decision making. And this aspect deals with the conditions. It deals with the decision making conditions which are existing